there's really 2 points that I want to drive home in attempting to answer this question. First, you really don't want to be selling backup, patching, any other security service in an a la carte type of fashion. In other words, you don't just want to be selling COVE on its own or patching on its own or EDR on its own, because I do get that question from time to time, but rather they should all be included as part of an overall security program, because no product on its own is 100% guaranteed in preventing a breach. You can't guarantee that your customer won't be breached just by installing COVE or just by installing patch. Protecting your customers from ransomware attacks and breaches, it requires a bundle of a variety of different security solutions, where COVE or patching, EDR, really are just one of those pieces of software that should be included as part of your standard minimum viable security stack. And you can see from this diagram, and if you've attended any of these office hours in the past, if you've attended any of my boot camps, just last week, I went through this in my building and selling security programs boot camp. This should be familiar to you. And really what this diagram does is it outlines how a ransomware attack works. And you can see from this illustration that there are multiple layers that exist between the network perimeter and the end users and their data. And because of this, each layer requires its own individual protective measures. Because you can see from all the bouncing around that when a ransomware attack occurs, it touches each one of these surrounding layers that surrounds the data. And in a few cases, a few layers are impacted more than once, especially when you look at the perimeter or the internet layer. And so if you focus on just selling COVE on its own, or patching on its own, or EDR on its own, on an a la carte basis, you're really only providing that type of protection against ransomware attacks on one of these 5 layers, and that's really at the device layer. To properly prevent an attack from occurring or a breach from occurring and it taking down the whole network and making the employees unproductive, you want to include protection at each individual layer surrounding the client's data. So same slide, just using it a different way. I'm using it here to kind of highlight, what security software should be bundled together, or what our recommendation is of what should be bundled together and layered together, so that you can market and promote, what we like to refer to as a layered security program, an end user security program, whatever you decide to call it, where these technologies work together. They work alongside each other to provide proper threat prevention, detection, remediation, and resiliency, which is where the COVE comes into play. Because again, COVE alone, patching alone, EDR alone, it just won't do it it just doesn't cut it. It won't do it on its own. So in that boot camp that I delivered last week, it's called Cracking the Code to Building and Selling Security Programs. I actually provided a framework and an outline for 4 different types of security programs based on the security and risk sensitivities of your customer. And for each program level, I went and provided an outline as to what features and services you would build into each level. And so if you did miss that boot camp, it is available on demand. And I would encourage you to go back and give that boot camp a listen, because I do go into so much detail on that. But if there is anyone in the office hours today that maybe missed that boot camp or hasn't attended that boot camp previously, because I think it was like maybe the 3rd or 4th time I've delivered it, I do have a copy of this screenshot, this matrix here in an Excel spreadsheet. So just put matrix in the question panel, and then I'll make sure to get a copy of that sent over to you, because it also is included in the MSP Institute as well. But I think just for sake of ease, I don't mind sending it out instead of making you go digging for it. So I just said all that. My only exception to this, to what I just went through, is if you're targeting enterprise type clients in a co-managed model. And what I mean by this is, you are targeting and engaged with companies that they have somebody internal that looks after their network already. There's an IT director in place, there's an IT admin in place. And so they are the ones who are ultimately responsible for the management of their own internal network. And then maybe they're just looking to partner with you to take over the management of maybe one particular piece or aspect of it. So in a co-managed opportunity, maybe they are terrible at managing their own backups. Maybe they don't really have a great backup product that they're using. They don't have any good backup procedures or processes in place. Or maybe the internal technical team, they just really hate patching systems. They find every reason not to patch their systems because they find it so mundane. In these types of instances, you could, as part of your co-managed offering, sell COVE or sell patching in that a la carte manner. Because again, everything that I was just talking about from a layered security approach to building your programs, that's really for the traditional managed services model, where in that traditional model, you as the MSP, you're taking over complete ownership and management of the company's network because they don't have anybody responsible internally for that role. So they're outsourcing that responsibility, they're outsourcing that risk management to you. So in those types of cases, in that traditional model, this is where I'm saying you don't want to sell your services individually. You don't want to sell in that a la carte type of manner, but rather what you want to do is create a security services bundle like I just went through with that matrix and sell that bundle as a whole. And then when it comes to the co-managed model, where it is possible to sell COVE or sell patching on its own, unfortunately, I don't and can't really give averages in terms of pricing because it depends on so many different variables. Like I know for patch, when I talked to a few different partners on how they price for patch in a co-managed model, I couldn't get a definitive answer, because it really depends on the size of the company that you're dealing with, how many locations they have, the number of systems that need to be continually patched, how many patch schedules you need to set up for a particular customer, how you decide to deal with reporting around that, how often do you report back to them, what kind and how much reactive manual labor do you need to budget in to remediate systems, where there is missing or failed patches, and then who on your team is going to be responsible for that, because every tech, depending on their level, has different tech costs associated with them and what you pay that. So with all of those different variables, it's very difficult to give you an average cost for patch in a co-managed market. Like, one partner told me that they charge $20 a server for patching servers in their co-managed model. But, that $20 a server, they were supporting a 250 server organization. And so that $5,000 that they're making each month off of that customer is for 250 servers because the internal team didn't want to be responsible for patch any longer. And so they offloaded that aspect of their network management to this MSP. And, $20 a server, I would say is fairly low. But again, it's 250 servers, and at $5,000 a month from this customer, he told me that he's making pretty good profit off of this. And then it's the same for COVE when you look at that. There's a lot of different variables that go into how do you price for COVE, the number of locations, the number of systems, what are you backing up, how much data are you backing up, what's the backup schedule, how often are you going to back up, what services are you including backup testing, are you including recovery if something happens, who's going to do that work from your side from a technical standpoint, and then how much do they cost you, because you got to factor that in. And then if you're using COVE, that's one software piece, but maybe you're using another backup piece. So we have to factor all of that in. And so again, you're going to need to figure out all of those different variables and determine, what features, what services are you going to include in each particular, product, program, service. and then determine what the software and labor costs are going to be to support those features. And then you need to decide, once you determine your software costs and your labor costs, what kind of margin do you want to build in to that? Best in class MSPs, they're looking at anywhere from 60 to 80% margin that they build into their pricing, which this slide is also meant to bring up one other question that I got on pricing, because I also got asked, what do I see as the average workstation price that MSPs are charging? And again, I can't really answer that question because there are so many different variables that go into setting your price. So to kind of help answer all of those pricing questions, what you're seeing here is a screenshot of our costing calculator. Wasn't planning on going through it today because, again, I just went through it all last week in my boot camp. The boot camp is recorded so that you can go in and you can listen and then pause where you need to be and maybe take any notes. So if I would encourage you, again, if you weren't on that boot camp last week, to go into the MSP Institute and listen to it. And if you don't have a copy of this costing calculator, again, just put calculator in the question panel and I will send it over. It is on the MSP Institute, but again, sake of ease, I don't mind sending it out to anybody that would like a copy of the calculator. And then as you're working through it, reach out to your PSM because they know how to use this and they can work through this calculator with you to kind of help you determine your own pricing. Because again, there are so many variables that go into pricing and you don't want to kind of compare your pricing to your competitors because it really depends on how do you define your programs. So, and that's kind of the big, I think the big challenge when it comes to pricing is you got to define what's in your programs first. What are the services? What are the features? And then you need to work out your software costs and your labor costs to support those features.